Story 1. They usually seem naive about real-world matters, overly trusting, and somewhat surprised by typical adult issues such as bills or relationships. Story 2. One man I met in the military was so naive that he had no idea what the opposite sex looked like when naked, what to say or do when told no, how to have fun without a Bible in his hand, when he was being conned or cheated. As for that last point, this man was also taken for all his pay for 3 months straight because he believed that a certain stripper really liked him. Story 3. I once knew someone whose first call was always to her father, no matter what happened. She once crashed her car into a light pole and called her father, who asked her to abandon the car, take a cab, and head home. The car was fixed and delivered to her house within a few days. All fines to the city were paid as well. Another time, she was driving me around in a new city when the navigation system started glitching, and we got lost. She called her father. He was not from this city, so he did not know exactly how to help. She had a full-fledged mental breakdown. Story 4. Indian parents shelter their children so much that we appear inexperienced when we enter the real world. We have few life skills because parents managed everything for us or hired help. Story 5. Someone I met was from a very white Anglo-Saxon Protestant family. He was 12 and had never had Mexican food. We grew up in California. Story 6. Some of the most mundane and insignificant issues arise and cripple them. Story 7. Overly familiar with Disney movies and completely inexperienced with any other films. Story 8. Sheltered person here. Undomesticated. Cannot imagine living alone in a house without a helper. Struggles with budgeting and growing savings. Does not have the drive to seek a higher salary or promotion to a position with more responsibility because I am not desperate for money. Story 9. Overly shocked about mild issues and hardship. Looking at others to see if they also feel as shocked about something easily handled or solved. Story 10. It socially affected me. I had no idea how to go out with friends or how to meet others. I ended up an alcoholic because that was the only way I could feel comfortable around others. I am sober and still feel socially awkward and am a hermit now. Story 11. Financially unwise individuals who trust others easily and lack responsibility. Story 12. Hypersensitivity, offended by everything, always perceives themselves as a victim. Story 13. Once in high school, a girl yelled at me, saying I was trying to get her to join a group just because I said I was gay. Story 14. They have no essential life skills and depend on their parents for everything. Story 15. Having no contact with the reality we all live in, believing that everyone has had the same experiences, and judging those who are not on their level, blaming them for simply not being motivated enough, when in reality they have not been through enough hardship themselves to understand how difficult it actually is. Story 16. No initiative. Waits for you to take the lead with everything unless you prompt the person. Story 17. Rarely, if ever, being away from home alone is not their fault but the parents. Another example involves people who believe, or rather know, that all liberal cities are no-go zones needing rescue from a dictator, simply because they have never left their hometown. Meanwhile, residents are confused as they watch Fox News portray their city as a war zone. They simply shrug while sipping frappuccinos at Starbucks. Story 18. Cannot manage money. Expects others to cater to their needs and desires. Story 19. Not being able to handle any kind of unfortunate events in life. Story 20. People who do not take responsibility and play the victim in almost every difficult moment. Story 21. When people cannot understand how or why many suffer, they say things like, "No parent would do that," when someone mentions abuse. It is very uncomfortable talking to someone who thinks you are a mystical creature or a new rare phenomenon when you try to discuss your upbringing. From my experience, having no trauma is incredibly rare, not the opposite. Story 22. Everyone grew up sheltered from something because we all have completely different experiences. Story 23. Ex-boyfriend said, after we walked past a homeless person, "I don't understand homeless people. If I were homeless, I would buy a house." I was so shocked I just stopped walking. Couldn't believe it. I knew he was a bit sheltered before, but What? How? How can someone live until adulthood and not grasp the concept of homelessness? Sure, he was from a well-off family, but he lived in a poor country, so he definitely saw a lot of homelessness around him. Did he just never think? Does his brain work? What? I wish I was kidding. I had to explain homelessness to an adult. Story 24. Being sheltered is not by choice. Sometimes it is due to overbearing parents. Story 25. Unnecessarily fearful of strangers and new situations. Also, I think sheltered and entitled are two completely different things. Story 26. They cannot understand that they may be mistaken about something. Story 27. They do not know how to speak to or deal with people from different backgrounds. Story 28. Refuse to acknowledge that some terrible things happen to people within their own families. When hearing about such events, the first reaction is, it couldn't have been that bad. Story 29. They think the extremely comfortable life they live by global standards is horrible and do nothing but complain. Story 30. I remember at university in the mid-1990s getting into a debate with a few of the girls in my class because they believed we do not need feminism because there is no sexism anymore and people are not homophobic these days. By the third year of our course, I had converted the entire class to my intersectional feminist views. Story 31. A friend of mine was living with her boyfriend at the time. He sent me with her to the local laundromat. I was unaware that people didn't know how to do laundry. She asked me every step of the way what to do, and I instinctively guided her. The only time it struck me that she wasn't used to doing this was after we had been sitting there. A while when she asked why the washers weren't running. She didn't know she needed money. This was a public laundromat. I still wonder how she thought they made money. Also, before anyone asks, she is my friend, and I grew up with lots of nieces and nephews. I was used to teaching them to use washers and dryers, just as my sister taught me. Story 32. They sent the National Guard into Washington, D.C. because some angry adolescents attacked another sheltered child who calls himself Big Balls. Story 33. My college roommate freshman year literally did not know how to do laundry. It was not that he was bad at it. He genuinely had never touched a washing machine in his life. His mom did everything, and when she dropped him off, she gave him a laminated instruction card with photos she took of each step. The first week, he just kept buying new underwear from the campus store instead of washing his clothes. I had to physically walk him to the laundry room and show him how to use the machines. He tried to put his shoes in with everything else and used an entire bottle of detergent for one load. The same guy ordered delivery for every single meal because he could not figure out the dining hall. It was not that he did not like the food. He literally could not understand how the meal plan worked or where to swipe his card. His parents called the school to complain that the system was too complicated. He lasted one semester before transferring to a school 20 minutes from his house where he could live at home. The last I heard, he was 26 and his mom still made his doctor's appointments for him. Story 34. I brought up the concept of antinatalism with a classmate, and he was flabbergasted. I explained that I am an antinatalist and shared my reasons, which mainly focus on unnecessary suffering and how people perpetuate and amplify it while exploiting each other. His response was, well, suffering isn't a bad thing. It makes people grow. He is likely an upper middle class to wealthy white male from the United States, who later said arranged marriage is acceptable because it is just a cultural difference. He has no understanding of the depths suffering can reach and does not care to learn. Story 35. There are many different ways it can manifest itself. Often, a sheltered person will try to slowly gain their independence in young adulthood while feeling more ignorant about some topics. This can be hard and depressing at times, but eventually, they are often successful. Sometimes, on the other hand, some of them will overly rely on their family for all choices in life, even the smallest ones. This is not good for friendships as others are growing up, and then they seek a partner who parents them. Story 36. People who have to unlearn incorrect information taught by their family once they get out into the real world. Story 37. I live in one of the lowest crime areas in a big city. You can leave your doors unlocked here because the atmosphere is very calm. Our neighbors are police officers. My roommate, who grew up in a very small rural town, says, I can't go outside. I'll get harmed. This is the city. Story 38. When their parents wanted them to be happy for their career. Story 39. They cannot answer this question and instead make a self-referential statement. Story 40. A university student who has never been to McDonald's. This is early 1990s, Orange County, California. Story 41. Text their parents whenever they have a minor problem. Sometimes it is fine, obviously. Asking mom or dad how to cook eggs or change a light bulb is a good sign. Story 42. Takes no accountability for their behavior because it was never expected from their parents or guardians. Everyone knows exactly what they are doing, but not everyone knows how to accept or acknowledge that what they did or said was wrong. Story 43. I have a friend who is a bit older than me, and she is very clearly sheltered. She does not understand how banks work. She still asks her parents for things and help, such as if she can use her iPad. It is something. She becomes very uncomfortable as soon as anything even slightly difficult as a topic comes up, like car accidents. She asked us to change the topic for that. She is a sweetheart, but it is a little frustrating. She gets freaked out and does not seem to understand how the world really is. Story 44. I had a friend who could not understand why people with low income did not dress better. Story 45. Being over 20 and never having had a job. The cherry on top is saying you found Jesus and feeling the need to evangelize around the world. I later found out the woman had a billionaire father. Story 46. The concept of a poor or boundaried relationship with a parent is strange to them. Story 47. I grew up in a remote area as an only child. While coming from a wealthier family was helpful, it definitely set me back in a few ways. I am at the age where I am not so dependent on my parents, and these are some issues I've had to work on. Cleaning, managing money, and making friends, things I have always struggled with. Some less serious issues include the fact that there are many movies, shows, and experiences I have not seen and cannot relate to in conversations with others. I also had not been to a Walmart or large retail store until I was about 18, and that was a big deal for me. I am also relatively naive and tend to trust people more than most do. Story 48. They have no real-life experiences. At the slightest problem, they need to refer to someone who has always solved their problems for them. Story 49. They lack independence even as adults and hesitate to do anything their parents would disapprove of. They often seem much younger than they are in terms of emotional maturity. Story 50. Thinking that you, as an entry-level employee, deserve to make just as much as the person with 20 years of experience. Story 51. They grew up with an overbearing yet naive, overly dependent, overly anxious and fearful mother who warns them about everything using worst-case scenarios. As an adult, they are afraid to try anything new because they have been trained to think it will harm them. It is me. Story 52. The smallest problems make a person feel helpless and cause a breakdown. Story 53. Sheltered person here. When I moved out young, at 19 years old, I have big regrets. I went wild. I caught up on marijuana, psilocybin mushrooms, and alcohol really quickly. I was trying to make up for lost time. I was not allowed to go to the library until I was 16. I was not allowed to stay out with my friends past 7 p.m. My mother would lock me out of the house. I never went to teenage parties, sleepovers, or one-on-one dates. I was building up resentment and frustration until I metaphorically exploded and did all the things I was denied as a teenager. It is kind of embarrassing looking back. I damaged my relationship with my mother as well, because I was rebelling by doing normal American things. She is from a very conservative country, so in comparison, I was acting recklessly. We are better now though. I think it would have all been avoided if she had let me have these freedoms earlier in my life, instead of trying to squeeze them in over 3 years. Story 54. I grew up in an all-white Christian area. I did not know that Jewish or Muslim people existed in my county until I started dog walking in college. Story 55. I have a unique story. I met a person who never knew mailboxes could be attached to buildings. She always thought they were on the side of the road. I do not know exactly when this changed, but I know that drive-up mailboxes became part of building codes only recently, by the 1980s at the latest, and have certainly been around since the 1990s. This person has never been in a neighborhood or suburb older than the 1980s. Her reaction was telling. She was repulsed at the idea that someone could check their mailbox on the porch at least once a day, as if she could not believe people lived like that. If it were not for her reaction, I would have assumed she simply had not paid attention, because who pays attention to mailboxes, right? Story 56. Like my wife, doing incredibly embarrassing things in public without realizing it is cringe or weird. Don't get bullied at homeschool. Story 57. Unable to live too far away from mother and father after growing up. Story 58. Always making themselves the victim in regular life scenarios and situations. Story 59. They lack some common knowledge about the streets, memes, and life because they are sheltered. Some good households are like saints sometimes, which can be frustrating. Later, this might affect them socially. Story 60. When talking about popular culture, music, and slang, I often begin sentences with "I don't know what that means because that is me. I am learning, though." Story 61. When they have not traveled or lived outside of their town much. Story 62. Not an answer but a fact. Very sheltered people usually have mommy or daddy issues or suffer from narcissistic personality disorder or borderline personality disorder. Story 63. They are unaccountable, freely take risks most people would not, and are terrible kissers. Story 64. They are shocked by the price of literally anything. For example, wait, bread costs more than 20 rupees? They think every stranger is either a kidnapper or a best friend, with no in-between. They can recite school rules better than actual life skills but do not know how to pay a bill or cook rice. They think parties look like Disney Channel episodes. They believe that sleeping over at a friend's house is some sort of black market operation. They use mild bad words like stupid or heck and immediately apologize. They are convinced that alcohol is instant death juice. The first time they taste something spicy feels like a near-death experience. They get genuinely surprised that people have different opinions from their parents. Story 65. I grew up in a government housing estate, and my friend asked me if people in such estates used communal showers. Story 66. They tell you your problems are your problems, but they make their problems your problems too. Being wasteful with other people's time. The good old chestnut. They know the cost of everything and the value of nothing. Story 67. Being very attached to my mother and not knowing much because they do not know how to use Google. Cannot understand sex and sexual terms because they cannot use Google to look up explicit information. I used to attract many online predators. Story 68. Lack of resourcefulness and wasting resources. Accusing others of malicious intent as a false performance of high standards. Victim blaming and fundamental attribution error. Story 69. Everyday mundane life is like story time for some kind of adventure they are on. I know how to put waffles in the toaster too. Story 70. When you get to public middle school and do not know half the offensive terms and sexual references your peers are talking about. Story 71. I feel like they often miss social cues and have a less advanced sense of humor. Sheltered people I have been friends with often need jokes to be explained. Story 72. Unable to decide what they want to do by themselves. Should I take this job? Do you want to? Do you think I should get it? Well, it sounds like a step up. What do you think? Yeah. They never get it. Story 73. When they are an adult and rely on their parents to drive them everywhere or pick them up from places. I do not just mean occasionally, I mean all the time. My 25-year-old cousin is like this. She has been extremely sheltered, which is her parents' fault, and lives rent-free with them. She does not work, does not study, pays no bills and no rent. She does not drive and refuses to do so. Her parents drive her whenever she needs to go somewhere, and she refuses to use public transportation. I seriously worry about her future. Story 74. Here is an actual conversation I had when I was 20, with a coworker who was 21. Me, I just found out my friend, who is still in high school, is pregnant, and her boyfriend ran off. Coworker. They are not married? How did she get pregnant if they are not married? Me, they had sex. Coworker. Oh, wait, what do you mean by that? Different people have different definitions of sex. Me, trying to explain without going into graphic detail because it was already an awkward conversation. Coworker. You mean he laid on top of her? Me, yeah, close enough. Story 75. Lack of perspective, naivety about money, inability to solve problems independently. Story 76. No resilience. The smallest issue and they are helpless. Story 77. From Arkansas, I went to undergraduate school in Missouri. I visited in the middle of summer to take a tour of the school and wore long pants and a long shirt because I thought it would be cooler up north. I was surprised to see swimming pools. Story 78. They do not know how to manage basic adult responsibilities, especially money. Mom never had a budget. She would just spend until her monthly allowance from dad was gone, hoping she had bought groceries to last until next month. She has often had money stolen from her account and did not realize until her debit card was declined because someone was able to take a couple $1,000s, and she did not pay attention to her balance. She often forgets to pay some bills, such as her cell phone, which has been turned off more than once because she forgot, until she was unable to make calls. Story 79. Seeing small everyday setbacks as big problems. Even people who are significantly affected by small everyday setbacks due to neurodiversity or mental health issues know that these are minor challenges. Someone who is overprotected may think it is actually a big deal. Story 80. When I think about sheltered individuals, I usually think of someone who is completely unaware of the popular culture phenomenon of their age. They do not use what is typically considered inappropriate language, and they never get conversational double entendres. Usually, they are a little more trusting than one might expect in a particular environment, like smiling at strangers in a large city. Also, they speak in a way that seems slightly more formal, using little or no slang. These are all the things my husband points out when he says that I was sheltered growing up. To this day, he asks if I grew up in Somalia. Story 81. My best friend grew up very sheltered. I always surprise her with stories about my childhood. The biggest sign was her optimism. It is still strong today. She has even admitted she believes in the good in people because she has not seen a lot of bad. She is in her 40s. She is an amazing friend and listens without judging. She is great at pep talks. Story 82. Children brought up in a household where their parents had strict rules and controlled everything they did until they left home often do not know what it is to live independently or to take care of themselves physically, financially, and mentally when they finally move out on their own. Story 83. If healthy, sheltered, non-abusive parents are controlling a child, it creates a sheltered type of upbringing. These children are very responsible, passionate, take things to heart, and are naive to toxic behavior, making them great prey for people with personality disorders. They are often introverted and somewhat socially unpredictable, meaning they don't fully respond to exact social norms and expectations, but nothing off-putting. Most people are sheltered in one way or another. That sheltering can come from economic status, intellectual background, way of life, neighborhood, churches, and so on. The world is so big, and if you are exploring it, you are bound to seem sheltered. I am not from the United States, so when I came here for college, I would say most of the kids I met, by my standards, were very sheltered. However, I was very sheltered in almost the opposite ways. For example, travel, public transportation, booking transatlantic flights, planning group trips with friends, and doing my work independently. These were all things I was comfortable with. I was familiar with travel, independence, speaking multiple languages, cultural awareness, and religions. Most of my fellow 20-year-olds, like my junior friends in college, did not know much about these things. The college was in a small town. On the other hand, I was very sheltered in understanding United States laws, social norms, managing stress, and scheduling because the demands on your schedule here are so intense. It didn't matter how good you were at it. The United States is a whole different experience. Getting to actually learn rural life, appreciate it, and enjoy it was like having a 10-year-old figure out how to solve problems. The main issue was figuring out transportation. Story 84. Family tried to shelter me and I felt trapped. Luckily, I am a curious person. Once I was able to drive at 16, I explored as much of the city as possible. I always gravitated towards people different from me. There were downsides to being sheltered, such as being overwhelmed by the adult world and struggling socially. However, I attempted to learn, attended therapy, built a support system, and made a point to travel somewhere new once a year. I am also glad I had the internet when I was sheltered. Story 85. She could not live alone and gave up on her goals and dreams at the first problem. Her father was not there to solve it for her. Story 86. I was working with a woman, probably 24 or 25 years old. At the table, we were talking about taxes, and she said she had never done her taxes because she had never worked anywhere long enough to file. She had never worked a summer job, no ice cream shop, nothing by age 25. She did not last long and was fired 2 weeks ago. Story 87. I had a coworker. She told me she did not know about menstruation until she experienced it. I asked if they had not taught her about it at school. I was a bit surprised. I thought maybe it was a religious issue. I did not want to make her feel awkward. She said they had no sex education classes in high school, and talking to friends about it was not normal either. Now she is 28 and struggling with many questions because no one informed or talked to her about it. She has a master's degree in information technology. Story 88. They wait for you to wait on them. They are very dependent and lack initiative, as if courage has been starved. Story 89. When they enter adulthood with no lingering trauma. I'm joking, of course. But those who were not so fortunate may see those without clear trauma signs as sheltered. Story 90. When I was 19, I was living very far from home. I had always thought you went to the bank, told them what car you wanted, and what payment you could make. Quick backstory. My grandfather was a car dealer and kind of doted on me, so I went to the bank, far from home, and said I needed a car loan. They showed me to an office. After I sat down and told the loan officer about the Camaro I wanted, I proceeded to tell him the payment amount I wanted and said I was ready to sign some papers. He asked about a down payment, which baffled me. If I had money, I wouldn't be getting a loan. He then asked if I had filled out an application. That's when I got all kinds of offended. I told him in no uncertain terms that I had a job. I didn't want a job, and I just needed a car loan at his bank. I got up, went home, and called my grandfather in tears, telling him how rude everyone there was. Oh my goodness, so embarrassing. Story 91. When they think going wild means staying up past 9 p.m., you know they grew up sheltered. Story 92. Often, racism is easy to blame on other races when you have never encountered or spoken to someone from another race in real life. Story 93. My friend cleaned the floor moving forward. She cleaned it and then stepped on the wet floor she had just cleaned. She continued walking. Story 94. They call their parents when anything goes wrong. Also, while essentially everyone regresses somewhat when interacting with their parents to some extent, similar to muscle memory, a sheltered person will cry and raise their voice when venting to their mother and father, even if they are in their 30s or older. My former roommate tended to portray herself in two ways. A professional and caring social worker committed to helping others, with a no-nonsense attitude toward bigotry and social injustice, and then the life of the party, always ready to get intoxicated and so drugged that she did not seem to realize she started the same arguments with her boyfriend every night. I had to hear it all through the walls. She also used the same kind of bigoted language she condemned in others, showing clear hypocrisy. Whenever she spoke with her mother on the phone or when her parents visited, a third side emerged. A petulant child prone to tantrums and sobbing fits. Story 95. Just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, people, or the unaware of their privilege assumptive type who assume that access to affordable healthy food and quality health care is the same for everyone in America, or that everyone has a family support system. Story 96. They were only allowed to listen to Kids Bop. Even worse, they had no idea that there was music besides Kids Bop. Story 97. I had a roommate in college who was from India. I met her and her mother when she was moving in and gave her the keys. They both did not know how to use a key or how to open the door. I had to show her how to do laundry. She was also very messy and would leave dirty dishes in the sink for more than 2 weeks before I finally said something. She never took out the trash or did any chores. Later, she told me that in India her family had staff including cooks, maids, and drivers. Story 98. I did not realize I was sheltered until I realized at 18 that my local council was not open at the weekend. I had also never had Indian food. Story 99. Those who cannot do anything on their own and those who assume that you cannot handle things by yourself are the sheltered ones. They have no idea how far someone can go to get things done, even when there is almost nothing left to work with. Story 100. They are vegan or believe climate change is the most important issue. Story 101. When I think of sheltered, I automatically think of upper class or rich, or at the very least perceived that way. With that context in mind, I learned this when I was younger and it still seems true. They constantly ask you to cover them because they never have cash on hand. Then they take weeks to give you back your money because they are forgetful, since money is so trivial to them. Because they have no need to work for it, they simply don't value it the same. Meanwhile, you needed that money back like yesterday, and they never seem to comprehend why you're always stressed out, which is infuriating. The icing on the cake is they always have a Black American Express or some other ridiculously high-limit credit card, probably co-signed with their parents, yet never use it unless it's a super frivolous, unnecessary purchase. Story 102. Can't understand struggles, especially financial ones. Anyone I encounter who can't grasp the idea of an adult child helping the household financially is someone I consider heavily sheltered and entitled. People who talk about living in good areas with many luxuries as being poor or barely surviving. Story 103. They see homeless people and automatically think they are somehow in danger. Story 104. I have a friend who cannot make a decision about anything without getting her parents' input and advice. She is 40 years old. Story 105. The general sentiment of these comments seems to vary between viewing being sheltered as a privilege and misinterpreting signs of abuse and neglect. Honestly, the people commenting about watching someone struggle with social or basic life skills are the ones who were sheltered. The people they are talking down about are the victims of poor parenting. Story 106. They are genuinely shocked when they find out how much basic things cost. They are amazed that rent is $1,200 per month or that a decent used car is $15,000 because they never had to think about money growing up. They assume everyone had the same experiences they did. They casually mention, "Oh yeah, did not everyone go to Europe for their gap year?" Or are confused when people do not know how to ski or sail. They trust institutions and authority figures much more than people who grew up having to navigate bureaucracy or deal with unhelpful systems. They genuinely believe that if you ask nicely and follow the rules, everything will work out fairly. Story 107. I feel that many of the things mentioned here can also be signs of neglect, which is essentially the opposite issue. It has taken me a great deal of time and effort to learn basic life skills, not because I was sheltered, but because no one ever taught me these skills while I was growing up. Story 108. Getting attached to anything they are not willing to walk away from in 30 seconds flat if they feel pressure nearby. Story 109. No knowledge of events that occurred during their lifetime, such as history, general news events, popular culture, music, movies, and more. I also experienced situations where I took people to a diner or restaurant and realized they had never been to one before. On one occasion, I knew the person grew up very poor, so a restaurant, even a chain, was something their family could not afford or would not consider going to. Story 110. I once had a roommate who did not know how to do his laundry, could not cook, and did not know how to wash dishes. He asked how to make popcorn in the microwave. His mother did all of that for him until he moved in with me. When he moved out, he was much better at cooking, but the rest not so much. Story 111. Always codependent on someone else for their happiness, because they were never shown love properly. Story 112. Having overbearing parents who push marriage on their children's relationships means the parents do not want them as their responsibility anymore and have done nothing to help them in life. Story 113. My mother and all her siblings grew up sheltered, and none of them understand jokes or sarcasm. They are always confused about everything, which is exhausting. Story 114. When they are sure that some magical sky fairy exists and that one day, the magical sky fairy will make everything even better. Story 115. I recently met someone who has never had a can of SpaghettiOs or packaged Kool-Aid. I was amazed. Story 116. From my personal life experience, when someone thinks it is funny to be openly racist in public around a group of people they do not fully know or have met. Story 117. They are sensitive about dark humor. My jokes never land with them. Story 118. I often see sheltered people unable to hold genuine conversations or hear opinions that oppose their own. They cannot accept different perspectives, no matter the topic. For example, one of my best friend's younger brothers had cancer as a teenager and almost died. He literally missed the last year of high school, but they gave him a diploma anyway. He still lives at home in his mother's basement. I understand, he is missing half his organs, so he can only work part-time without exhausting himself. However, he barely performs competently at that. I worked with him for a year, also part-time due to my own health issues. He also goes on out-of-touch, conspiracy-filled political rants. I remember one morning when we were just waiting for our shift to start. I do not recall the topic, but he would not let me finish more than half a sentence before interrupting and reiterating his point without letting me contribute. I had to tell him to be quiet and that I was done with the conversation. After 2 minutes of silence, he tried to start it again. I ended up leaving the office. It is either that or passionately talking about video games that no one else in the room has played or is interested in playing. He does not notice or care. He just wants to discuss what he wants. This social detachment is a result of living in his mother's basement. The worst part is that it is completely his choice. His sister and several friends regularly try to make plans, hang out, and get him out of the house, but he has no interest. He does this to himself, and I cannot really feel sorry for him at this point. Story 119. Cannot watch scary movies despite being an adult and knowing it is just actors pretending. Story 120. They do not know what fentanyl is. My 38-year-old sister-in-law is very sheltered. Story 121. Here is me. We met a lady and were chatting about houses for sale in our town, and it came up that I couldn't do it without help because our house is so big. This is my husband's dream house, not mine, and we have many children that I'm busy with. It was just a passing comment in the general conversation, but she laughed so hard. I wondered inside, what is so funny about needing a maid because your house is so big and there are kids everywhere? I want to keep my priorities straight and I can only do so much, so I delegate some tasks like cleaning to others that I pay and treat like family. We eat lunch together, chat when we happen to be in the same room, and definitely pay a generous wage, including cash bonuses. I truly care about people I've known for years, who I trust around my kids, and who eat at my table just like other friends and family. Sure, they work here sometimes, but if not, they'd work somewhere else where I wouldn't know them at all. Anyway, she was laughing because she thought I was joking about having or needing a maid. If anyone thinks this life is easier, I get it is in many ways. I married a person who was raised in chronic, desperate poverty with not enough to eat or drink, no heat, and more. So yes, definitely easier than that. I am blessed, but we still have our challenges. Just know we have our own issues, and it might be much worse than it looks because money can often cover things up, for better or worse. I think it's worth mentioning that my husband, who came from abject poverty, and I, who apparently had the proverbial silver spoon, were both severely physically abused as children. We even knew each other. Then what literally happened was he was offered help and support because of his home situation. I was pushed aside because our family had it together. Only we didn't. It was a mess, and no one came for me. I'm glad people tried to help him. I just wish they would have seen me too, because money doesn't heal a child's heart. But it often paves the way to make something easier so you can concentrate on other things. Story 122. I used to feel very unsure of myself, like I missed out on learning how to handle real-life situations because I was always protected. Making decisions felt scary, and I did not know how to set boundaries or speak up. It took me a while to realize that being sheltered does not mean I cannot grow. That is why I am looking forward to the AskReddit. It is a new social media platform I heard about. It feels like a safe space to connect, learn, and finally meet people who understand. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.